Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started since it's 10:30. For those people who don't know me, my name is Marty Hobson. I've been here since 2003, I guess. That's an awfully long time. And we're here to talk, hopefully in the right spot for VCA 2150, and you're in the middle of your nutrition lectures, yes? So I'm just giving this one, and then I'll see you again for behavior. But we're going to talk about the stages of growth, gestation, and lactation today. And this is an awful lot to cover because we have dogs and cats for all of these different life stages. But good news, a lot of the information is exactly the same with a few little differences. So there's a lot of repetition, and there's also going to be a lot of me just like winging through the slides because you can go back and look at it if you're interested. A lot of stuff with lots of numbers. You're used to that from nutrition probably. You're not going to be expected from me to have any numbers within reason memorized, like not detailed things, okay? So a lot of this is really just common sense. I've also forgotten my glasses, so I only have these reading glasses, and we'll just see if I can get through this without throwing up or whatever. So our learning objectives, oh come on, yes, today will be to understand the nutritional requirements for dogs and cats for these stages. So the first thing is that no matter what stage, you've seen this before probably, this is the WSAVA Nutritional Assessment Checklist, which is a great thing to do when you're dealing with a nutrition case. But for every animal, starting with the basics, you're asking questions like what is your animal eating and how much and what type of feeding, and you can see here that in the nutritional assessment checklist, they actually say, what are these risk factors? Like, is this a pregnant animal? Is it lactating? Is it a kitten or a puppy? Is it a senior? So we're gonna have to deal with nutrition differently depending on what life stage animals are in. So as an overview, females particularly, although people would make the point that breeding males as well, have specific nutritional needs. So the pregnancy has a big demand on our females, and that includes maintaining the queen or the dam and all the energy and nutrients that are required to grow all those puppies or kittens. And then lactation is probably the highest demand because they're not only growing them but now growing them outside the body to some fairly large sizes. So we have to consider all of these things. And so it's important to feed correctly because we're trying to optimize different reproductive things, like is the animal going to be able to conceive? How many kittens or puppies is the mom going to be able to have per litter? How many litters are they going to be able to have? Are the kittens and puppies going to survive? And how successful will the lactation be? So this is review. And we won't spend too much, but you've seen this before, but just pointing out that energy is important. And so we have our resting energy requirements, right? And then you know that there are life stages or different factors that we multiply a resting or a basal metabolism amount of energy by to get what we need as a daily or a maintenance energy requirement. So when we're calculating, it's important to, like it says here, we're thinking about activity level, the life stage, that's what we're talking about today, age and environment, but also remembering, so this is a nice thing in red to remember for all of our patients, when you're using these formulas, just like with people, you could have, you calculate, you need 562 kilocalories per day. Well, that could vary 30% higher or lower depending just on individual variability, right? So whenever we're looking at these formulas, have some common sense, and you're going to need to think about things like body condition and scoring to be able to meet those needs appropriately. Again, this is sort of review. Here's K9 daily energy requirement factors. So we're taking our RER and multiplying it by this. You're noticing that a regular intact adult is, a certain number, but a neutered adult, the amount of increase over RER is reduced by 20 or 30%. You're seeing that for things like weight loss or critical care, it's a lot lower if the animal's not moving around a lot. If we want to gain weight, it's going to be higher. But then lower down, you see gestation. This is for dogs. Hey, first 42 days, the first 5 or 6 weeks, it's pretty much the same as just being an intact adult, right? But then we see a great increase, and we'll get into why that happens in the last bit of gestation. And then you see for lactation in dogs, it depends on the number of puppies, and it goes way up all the way to almost 6 times your resting energy requirement. So take-home message, lactation needs a lot of energy. This is the same thing but split out with some feline life stages, so not quite as detailed, but including our feline friends. And so you'll see the same sort of thing. We have a higher need during gestation and lactation, and a higher need during growth. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit specifically, and again, this will go perhaps quickly, but it's going to be the same information over and over again. So we're talking about the moms at first and their different stages. Just to point out that with a lot of animals, I mean, I would say, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but dogs and cats that are being bred on purpose probably represent only a small amount of our total number of domesticated dogs and cats, right? So you may be dealing with breeders, and I would say it's safe to say that unless you have a special interest, they probably know more about nutrition of their breeds and what to do for the life stages than we do. Not to say that there aren't some people with some crazy ideas out there, so it is our job to guide them and use evidence-based medicine. For cats particularly, there's not that many cat breeders out there in the world compared to just the number of cats breeding accidentally. So even though we're talking about breeding, a lot of times we're not going to be dealing with until you're presented with, oh, we noticed our barn cat, we thought she was just getting fat, but now we think she might be pregnant, and she's 2 days before giving birth, and you're dealing more with the growth of puppies and kittens. But we may need to know some of these things about pregnant dogs and cats. I keep wanting to press the down arrow and it doesn't work on this computer. This is a cat that I fostered. Her name was Pumpkin. She's quite pregnant here. She was very thin. I would give her a body condition score of like a 3.5 to 4, and then had this huge belly. So this slide is pointing out that whether you're overweight or underweight, queens probably shouldn't be bred if you have that option. So they should have an ideal body condition score, and if they're too skinny, you're going to have all of those problems that you see listed, and an overweight queen might have some dystocia problems. It's also interesting, I thought this was interesting, that during estrus, a female cat's appetite will go down, so they might eat less and their body weight might decrease. So it makes it important, if you know that you're going to be trying to breed this cat, that you feed them a high quality maintenance diet. Over to the dogs, same thing, right? We want to have them ideal weight. If they're too skinny, we can see problems that you see on the left. If they're overweight, we can see some problems that you see listed on the right. Again, a bit of a repeat, but female dogs also tend to experience decreased appetite and sometimes vomiting when they are ovulating. And so if you feed small meals before and after the mating time period, that can help with that, because we do want to optimize their nutrition. And so if they're feeling nauseated during that time, it's not great. All right. So back to our cats, just kind of zooming in a little more specially. So this graph that you see, if I get my mouse all the way over here, does it appear? Yes, it does. Okay, so this graph, just to explain, we have body weights in kilograms for a bunch of cats, right? We have our weeks of gestation. The red line represents when they're giving birth, and then some lactation. So the purple line is the weight that the mom cat is gaining. Then she gives birth to the babies, loses some weight, and then continues to lose weight as she lactates. The green line is what kind of energy she requires through this period, drops a little bit at birth, and around the birth time period, and then increases as she lactates. So this is a pretty linear line, right? So through the entire pregnancy period, cats are gaining weight in a linear way, and this is different from most mammals, which really don't have much weight gain for the first 2/3 of pregnancy, and then it shoots way up. It is independent of the number of fetuses. The amount of weight that the cat, I find this a little difficult to believe, but maybe it's that if you're only having 2 kittens, they're just going to weigh twice as much as if you had 4 kittens. I'm not sure. But it is independent of the number of kittens that mom is having inside her. They are just going to gain weight in that linear fashion, and that amount of weight as well. So the energy intake, you can see, matches this, right? It just goes up and up and up and up and up. So the energy amount that they were needing beforehand, the numbers are over here, it's going to increase to about 25 or 50% above what they needed, right? So that's the amount of increase. But then, and so that would translate in terms of numbers that through their birth they would need about 1.2 to 1.5 RER at the beginning, and will increase to about 2 times RER. And then we sort of mentioned it already. My phone is ringing. It's Kensington Physiotherapy wanting to tell me about my appointment tomorrow. Okay, so and then through lactation, as I mentioned, wow, we see it going way up, and we saw that in those energy charts that we saw. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. I did not. Okay. So we see the same graph here, but a little bit of more different information in the words over here. So right before birthing and immediately following, see this dip here in the amount of energy taken in. Does anybody have any ideas when you get really, really, really pregnant, why you would decrease the amount of food that you're taking in? Yes, okay, so that giant gravid uterus is so giant and big, you really, and this is the same for cats and dogs, you can't fit as much in. So again, we don't want to see dogs and cats losing too much weight. We want to see them gaining and optimizing that nutrition. So again, the take-home message is you're feeding a good quality diet with all of the optimized nutrients that those pregnant females need. Okay. Great. This is a slightly different graph, and it's talking about lactation specifically for cats. So this is weeks of lactation across the bottom. So here we have starting off and going to about the end of the weaning period, which could start as early as 3 weeks, but goes up to 8 weeks. And again, we do see an increase that the queens need of taking in energy to support their litter. So we do see that the energy demands peak at about the 7th week. However, they're just kind of measuring the food that they put out, and the kittens could be eating some of that. The peak lactation actually occurs at about 3 to 4 weeks, and that is likely the biggest amount of energy that the queen is needing. So again, I would not expect you to know any numbers, but just remembering that lactation takes a ton of energy as well as water. And you should know a rough idea of how many weeks of lactation a cat's going to have, and that it goes up and up and up, and then the kittens are weaned. Okay, back to this graph. Now I'm just getting to the end of weaning and pointing out that the queens, they drop in weight. And then by the end, when the kittens are weaned, they're pretty much back at the body weight they were before they got pregnant. Does that make sense? So they might be a little bit above. Again, body weights are on this side. We're following the purple line. So the purple line comes down, and maybe it's a little bit higher by the end of weaning. Now, another interesting thing to point out is that you think all of this weight gain is the babies, right? So when they give birth, why doesn't this drop back a lot more? Why doesn't the weight fall a lot more? And we'll see that it does in dogs. An interesting thing about cats, and I think it was in words on one of the previous slides, they only lose about 40% of the weight that they've gained, only about 40%, and they keep the other 60% of their weight gain in stores for lactation. Okay, so that's a little bit different. So again, if you were doing weights of a pregnant cat before and after birth and keeping track of these things, it's not unusual that it's surprising how little weight that they lose when they give birth to those kittens. We're flipping over to dogs now. So unlike cats that have that linear growth pattern, a dog's energy requirement does not increase until the 3rd trimester, which happens at about 5 weeks. So this 35 days here would represent about 5 weeks. So total gestation for dogs and for cats has an average of around 63 days. And we can divide it into 3-week trimesters or 21 trimesters. So for the first couple of trimesters, the energy needs do not go up that much. Only 5.5% of fetal development occurs during this. So this is the growth of the baby puppies in there. and it's barely measurable for a whole like 5 weeks. And then all of a sudden those feti take off and grow. And 75% of the weight and the puppy's length occurs like in this window here, way late in gestation, if that makes sense. So remember, that's different from the cat's linear. And for the dog, it does depend on the litter size. So they are going to gain much more weight if they have a larger litter size. So here's a similar graph to the one we looked at cats, but this one is for dogs. So we have our gestation or pregnancy here, we have lactation. Now this is not in kilos, this is a change in body weight percentage, right? So they started off here, if we say their pre-breeding weight is 0, this doesn't climb very much, remember, until the last trimester, and then it goes way up. So by the time they are whelping or giving birth, they have gained about 15 to 25% of how much they weighed before they started this. And the energy requirements are here in pink. And we see that there's not much of a climb, but then a pretty big climb, about 30 to 60% of the amount of energy that they needed before they were bred. And then during lactation, it shoots way up and then starts to come down as the puppies become weaned. So let's follow this weight and food intake, I guess, because they go hand in hand. So again, they're not gaining very much weight for the first 2 trimesters. Then it shoots way up. Then when they whelp, see how their weight drops way down. It really returns to pretty much their pre-breeding weight, doesn't it? And then they have to eat a lot to up here to maintain things, but they can even start to lose weight. And we'll get into some more details, but we don't want them to lose too much weight in this period, and hopefully once the puppies are weaned, they've come back to about the same weight that they were before they were breeding. So the last bit of words on this slide talk about how food goes down a little bit here and here. We saw this in cats. So again, can anybody remind me why a really, really pregnant mom dog might decrease their food intake right before they whelp? Come on. Louder. There's no space. There's no space in the stomach. The other interesting part is that I know it's marked here at about 4 weeks. And it does say here, this little asterisk here, a transient decrease in food intake around the 4th week is indicative of pregnancy, as though there's something that happens that kind of puts them off their food. Now, in other literature, I read this. 2 weeks after mating, when the embryo implants, kind of just like estrus, there's going to be hormonal changes, and that can make them go off their food. So I'm not sure why this source talked about 2 weeks after mating, and this source is going with more like 4 weeks after mating. And I'm not, no one's going to test you on that, but just so if you had a dog that was confirmed as being pregnant, and all of a sudden they went off their food a little bit in the middle of the pregnancy, it doesn't mean something's terribly wrong. It's just be aware that that can happen. And again, when they're getting close to whelping, they are probably going to go off their food and may stop eating completely. All right. So let me see here. If I go backspace, no, that won't do anything. So if they're well prepared, they only lose, they end up being around the same amount of weight as their pre-breeding weight, right? They should be only about 5 to 10%. It's important to think of feeding them ad lib as well as the cats during lactation, which we'll talk about when we get to that stage. They do lose some weight, as I mentioned, in lactation, but it's important that they shouldn't lose more than about 5% in the first 4 weeks. And their energy requirements steadily increase and peak at about 3 to 5 weeks of lactation. And then they will eventually return to maintenance levels when the puppies are weaned. So the curves look pretty similar, but can be a little bit different. This is just a comparison of dogs versus cats, their requirements. So again, you can see the dogs in the red line have, you know, a little bit of an increase, but not too much, and then shoots up in the third trimester, versus the cats have a very linear increase in the amount of energy that they require. The take-home message for something like this, the contrast between dogs and cats, is that you don't want a dog to get too heavy or trend towards obesity during its pregnancy. So even though you may think as soon as the dog is pregnant, oh, it's time that we switch to some kind of special diet, in the first 2 trimesters, a dog would only need regular maintenance food, and you would switch later on. Or you could switch right away, and we'll talk about that when we go to some specifics. Okay, so the take-home messages about the slides so far: both dogs and cats should be in good condition. And we didn't talk about this too specifically, but ideally, if you knew a cat was going to be bred, you could start it on a pregnancy lactation food or an all life stage food 2 weeks before breeding, so that you knew it was going to be in great condition. The cats have a linear weight gain increase, and so supporting them with a food that is for pregnancy and lactation or all life stages, it can be done right away, or even in the first point 2 weeks before breeding. But dogs only have maintenance energy requirements for the first 2 trimesters, and then a huge increase. So you are going to want to switch both your dogs and cats that are pregnant to a food that supports them better, and we'll talk about the specifics of what food that is in the next slides. But the timing of it can differ by species. When the cats give birth, they only lose about 40% of their weight gain, and the rest they have in stores for lactation. But dogs, after they give birth, are pretty much back to their same pre-gestation weight, or maybe 5 or 10% over. Gestation takes a lot of energy, and you saw these numbers, but again, I wouldn't be expecting anybody to have these memorized. So these amount of increase of energy requirements would translate to feeding them at a 1.6 to a 3 times RER instead of a regular maintenance factor for your RER. Lactation takes a lot of energy. I think these ones are pretty important to remember, like just knowing you might need to feed them 6 times as much energy during their peak lactation. And it's important for both animals to have ad lib food during lactation through to weaning. So those are some of the things that we've covered as a bit of a summary. Okay, so now we're going to talk specifically about how do we manage these. We've talked about some of the needs in terms of energy, and now we're going to talk about what specifically this spells out for food. So here's your energy pyramid. Don't forget about water as well. Super important during lactation. That's a lot of fluid that has to be taken in to support the proper homeostasis of all of those puppies or kittens. And then we have, in terms of basically relative amounts, all of the other key nutrition factors going up there. Okay. So this is for cats, and like I said, prior to breeding, you could place them on a diet to support gestation and lactation. 2 weeks before breeding is standard, and you can free feed them unless they're, again, this is common sense, you would be using body condition scores, and if you thought they were gaining too much weight too quickly, you would want to not feed them. So you're using all of your senses to manage this properly. So the kind of food that you're looking for, here's just an example, and these are from Dr. Carr's slides. He made the point that Royal Canin is one of the only places where you can find actual photos of the life stage statements from the bag as a photo versus, oh, no, 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 no. Okay. I want them all on. Isn't that funny? Okay, so everything's turned off, and if I push this, it'll turn them all back on again, right? So the pictures that we're showing you there were, and I want the main PC, hopefully coming back soon. There we go. This picture of food, and why are you not turning on? Turning on. Okay, it says please wait for the outsides, but everybody can see at least one. Okay. we have this Reproduction in food, and it says that it is profiled for growth, gestation, and lactation. So you can feed it to kittens, and you can feed it to pregnant cats, okay? Some other foods that you're gonna get are just for growth. And you might be tempted to say, oh, growth has lots of extra nutrients, so any pregnant animal, I'm gonna feed it like a kitten food or a puppy food. And probably doing that, if that was all that was available to you, is better than feeding a maintenance food, okay? Because we do need things that are more dense in nutrients. But ideally, you would feed a food that supports specifically either all stages or growth, gestation and lactation, not just growth, because there can be differences, as we'll see, especially in terms of minerals like calcium and phosphorus. Okay, so ideally you're looking for something that either says it's for all life stages or it's for gestation and lactation specifically, or it could say growth, gestation, and lactation. And this is going to be highly digestible and pretty dense in terms of its energy. Let me pull up the page. So if you did feed a really crappy food, come on, turn on. If you did feed a crappy food, it's on, but why isn't it picking up the thing? Oh, I have to say this and I have to say that. Okay. Should be coming on soon. If you fed a crappy food that didn't have a good density of energy, they would have to eat so much of it to get the energy requirements that they need that would be very hard to do. And as mentioned, eventually that uterus takes up so much room that they really can't eat Purina Cat Chow or Whiskas or Friskies enough to support what they need. I mean, it's better than starving to death, but, and again, a lot of barn cats are probably eating that and doing just fine. But moving on, let's see. I feel like let's see. Okay, so for, there we go, for protein, we see the take-home message from this is that it's increased, okay? So maintenance is 26% on dry matter, whereas growth and reproduction, we see higher amounts. So an animal-based protein is best for our cat friends, and for fat, same thing. It's increased, like more than doubled. When we do have increased fat, it's going to provide much more energy. You remember that fat is the most dense energy nutrient, and it is going to improve the digestibility. And so back to protein for a second. If you're not feeding enough protein, the kittens are going to be smaller. You're going to have a higher mortality. There's impaired immunocompetency. This was interesting to me. The kittens will not be able to find their way back to the nest. If you do not give enough protein to the kittens, it will impair their home orientation ability. Does that make sense? So out in the wild there, they have the little nest and they're kind of exploring afar, and if we're not giving them enough protein, that is going to be impacted. We also can see abnormal locomotion development in kittens, as well as increased aggression and fearfulness. So it is probably best to make sure that we have our moms on a high enough level of protein that is going to translate into growing the fetuses on the inside and providing the amount of nutrients that the young ones need as well once they're on the outside. Okay, they also have a specific need for taurine, which you all know, and again, all the stages kind of bleed into each other, so I know sometimes I might talk about kittens, but I'm talking about feeding the mom to grow the kittens, as well as the mom lactating for kittens, as well as the kittens eating once they're able to eat, okay? So if our goal is to grow healthy kittens, we need to feed the mom and make sure there's enough taurine, otherwise we get these things listed on the slide, and they also have some need for certain antioxidants as well. Continuing on with our queens for essential fatty acids, the stress of pregnancy and lactation means that essential fatty acids can really support that if we feed enough. I don't know if this has been taught to you anywhere else, but they have specific needs for linoleic acid and arachidonic acid because they can't synthesize their own linoleic acid. and they can't, even if you give them linoleic acid, they have a limited ability to make arachidonic acid out of the linoleic acid. So if we don't feed both of those, we can have reproductive failures like kitten death, poor weights, not conceiving. And as well, DHA, another important essential fatty acid, important for retinal development, brain development, and cats have reduced ability to convert ALA to DHA. So it's important to make sure that your food includes that as well. Again, the take-home message is if you get an AAFCO certified food that supports gestation and lactation for your cat, all of this is going to be covered. For calcium and phosphorus, they do need a bit more than normal maintenance, just because they're growing skeletons. So that's going to take a lot of calcium and phosphorus. Cats are a little more immune to problems. Kittens are anyway, and we'll talk a little bit more than that, than dogs. But it's still an important thing. And again, if you're feeding a correct food for that life stage, that will be looked after. Moving on to dogs. So again, we're talking mostly about the stages of pregnancy and lactation, but it bleeds over into feeding the puppies, both through lactation and later on. So this is, again, a bit of a repeat for what we said about cats, but it's important that we look for something that is either all stages or it provides nutrition for gestation and lactation. In this case, it includes growth, and it includes growth of large-sized dogs. More than 70 pounds expected as an adult. So this really covers a lot of your bases. It's hard to imagine they can really formulate it for all of those things, but I trust them that they can. So again, we're looking for an energy-dense food and one that's highly digestible, remembering that the pregnant dogs only need maintenance needs until the 3rd trimester, right? Remember that from before? An exception might be giant breed dogs in that they're growing those large puppies so quickly, even though it's mostly in the 3rd trimester still, but they may need a really dense, giant breed dogs may not be able to take in enough in a maintenance diet to support gestation adequately because the dogs are so big. Okay, so again, the first 2/3 of pregnancy, they only need a maintenance diet. You could just feed a maintenance diet for the first 4 weeks, and then at week 5, which would indicate the last trimester, you could switch them over to a diet for all life stages, or specifically for gestation lactation. Or if you felt like you wanted to, why not just feed them that for the whole time period? As long as you're monitoring their body condition score and don't feel like they're getting too fat, or you're adjusting the amount that you're feeding for the kilocalories that they need and feeding them a maintenance level of energy, you could then avoid changing the diet mid-gestation. We already talked about how female dogs can go off their food at certain points during gestation. So if you felt like you just wanted to make things easier and feed them a gestation lactation diet for the whole time, that's okay too. If you were, though, either way, you have to make sure that in the 3rd trimester, marked at the 5th week, that you start increasing their calories 10 to 15%. Twice daily feeding is fine for most, but large breed dogs or giant breed dogs with large litters may need more frequent feeding because, again, lack of room, so they can only fit in so much at a time. So maybe in order for them to get all the calories they need, we do have to feed more frequent small meals. Moving on, we saw this for cats. For protein, if you don't, again, maintenance until the 3rd trimester, but in the 3rd trimester, they have a huge increase for protein needed, and that is dependent on the size of the litter. Okay, so this is, again, you see these little FYI only. What I mean by this, what Dr. Carr meant by this when he gave this lecture, is that no one's expecting you to remember the actual numbers. Okay, I would expect you to remember they need more protein versus maintenance. Okay, so yes, it's for your information, but if I said, do pregnant dogs need more protein versus maintenance, and you said yes, then that would be a good thing to know. You can always look up the numbers, but the general concepts, which are pretty easy, I would expect you to know. Same thing for fat. So I'm listing the maintenance needs here, the percentage of dry matter that's needed, and then just illustrating that in gestation and lactation, they basically need more. If you don't give them enough protein, you're going to see decreased birth weights, increased neonatal mortality and morbidity, and decreased immunocompetence. All right. So the fat is also super important because, like we said with cats, it improves digestibility. It's tasty to eat, so they're going to eat it, and provides a good concentrated form of energy. Puppies don't have a lot of energy reserves, so they really need the milk to be very dense calorically, and if we increase the fat, it translates into that milk being a lot more energy dense as well during lactation. So moving on just to a few other things, they also need essential fatty acids like cats. And so if we feed the dam like a good amount of DHA, you're going to have that in the milk. And there is an interesting study that I quote later on, that if you have good essential fatty acids, and this would be through pregnancy and lactation of the mom, the puppies are more trainable. So they fed pregnant dams different diets that had differing levels of DHA, and found that the puppies were, quote unquote, smarter or more trainable in the ones with a certain level of DHA and other essential fatty acids. Of course, carbohydrates, as I mentioned, is needed for the mom. And you probably remember that we have levels of proteins and fats, but the way we find the dry matter of carbohydrates is by subtracting everything else, and like the fiber and the ash and everything, and then we get the carbs. So we don't really have AFCO maintenance needs, but in gestation we do, because the puppy's main source of carbohydrates is glucose, and so we definitely need the mom to be getting a certain level of carbohydrates as well. Okay, calcium and phosphorus in dogs is pretty important, and the needs increase again because they're growing skeletons, 60% in the last trimester. I have to keep looking over here because that clock is not correct. And so it has to be a delicate balance. And so yes, they do need more calcium, but they don't need excessive calcium. If you feed too much calcium to the mom, it will do a feedback loop with your parathyroid hormone and decrease the activity. So when the parathyroid hormone turns off, it will actually decrease the amount of calcium, even if you're feeding a lot of it, that like if you suddenly dropped the calcium, all of a sudden the pregnant mom could have a condition called eclampsia, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. So here we have our gestation and lactation. I've given you the dry matter percentages. Again, you don't have to have that memorized. And then a calcium phosphorus ratio, because they have to be kept in pretty high ratios, tight ratios, like very controlled. But the point being that you can see here that for gestation and lactation, we have amounts of calcium here, which is higher than this, and amounts of phosphorus here, which is higher than this, okay? And even our ratio, like there is some overlap, okay? But overall, it's a higher ratio range than this one is. Does that make sense? Okay, so higher amounts of both calcium and phosphorus, but a pretty tight ratio, and we can't give them too much calcium. In fact, it's not recommended to give calcium supplements during pregnancy for the risk of making your parathyroid hormone tank, and then we get eclampsia. What is eclampsia? I'm sure it might have been mentioned in Therio, or you'll get it later, but it is also known as puerperal tetany or hypocalcemia. So it's low blood calcium. Okay, most often it happens in the first 1 to 4 weeks when they're lactating. You'll see tetany, tremors, facial itching, restlessness, a ton of panting, and very similar to milk fever in cows. And it's because either in late pregnancy they required so much calcium to grow the skeletons, or in lactation they're requiring so much calcium to feed their puppies that the mom's calcium levels go down. However, even though we may wish to supplement through lactation with a calcium supplement, which I won't talk about too much because that's getting a little bit detailed, we don't want to do it in pregnancy, again, to avoid that parathyroid hormone, what's the word I'm looking for? Feedback loop. All right. So what are the take-home messages for our key nutrition factors for pregnancy and lactation of both dogs and cats? You need a lot of water for lactation and thermoregulation. When you're lactating, dogs and cats both need about 3 to 6 times maintenance energy for about 8 weeks, and higher amounts of proteins, carbohydrates to maintain lactose levels and provide energy to those puppies. Cats and dogs, while they're pregnant and lactating, need foods with above average digestibility. Lactating cats and dogs needing higher levels of calcium, phosphorus, and fats versus maintenance diets, but don't supplement calcium during pregnancy. Cats, more than dogs, also need dietary DHA and other essential fatty acids for retinal function. That was mentioned a lot when I was reading articles about this. Dogs do need essential fatty acids too, but it may not be as critical as it is reported in cats. So look for a diet for your pregnant and lactating animals that meets the nutrition profile for lactating and pregnancy or reproduction for cats or dogs as established by AAFCO. So look for an AAFCO statement on the bag, preferably established by a feeding trial. You've heard about that versus the theoretical stuff or the chemical testing that they do. All life stages is appropriate, or pregnancy and lactation. Feeding puppy foods or kitten foods or large breed puppy foods are generally not appropriate. If nothing else is available, regular growth is okay. That's probably better than a regular adult maintenance because it will provide them an increased density of energy. But ideally, looking for something for those life stages would be good. Okay, a couple quick questions. A mom dog's energy needs during gestation increase with the size of the litter, true or false? Does the energy needs of a dog, is it dependent on the size of the litter? Anybody remember? I'm seeing some nods. Yes, it is. True or false? A mom cat's energy needs during gestation increases with the size of her litter. No, it is independent of the size of the litter. After giving birth, both dogs and cats lose most of the weight they gained during pregnancy. True or false? Somebody shout it out. I'm just hearing false. Okay, because the queens actually don't. They only lose less than half of the weight that they gained. And true or false, omega-3 fatty acids are essential for fetal brain development. What do you think? True. Yes. All right. So we are now moving into growth. And just pointing out here that milk is important and it has lots of good stuff in it. A lot of this is going to be a repeat of what to do with your pregnant animals as well. It's a highly digestible energy source. We need it for maintenance and growth with all kinds of good stuff in it. Most puppies and kittens are going to begin to eat solid food between 3 and 4 weeks. And it's you can certainly encourage your pet parents to encourage this transition because it's going to lessen the energy demands on the mom, and eventually mom isn't going to be able to provide all of this as the puppies and kittens grow. So for weaning, you can start offering a gruel at 3 to 4 weeks of age. You could take a canned puppy and kitten food with an equal amount of warm water, or you could take dry food for puppies and kittens, grind it up with 3 parts warm water. Obviously, you'd be wanting to refresh that either at every feeding, or if you made a day's worth, you'd keep some in the fridge. If you were ever trying to heat it up for improved appetite, you would definitely want to do that and stir it and let it cool and finger test it so you wouldn't be having hot pockets in the gruel. As the puppies become, or kittens, more tolerant of solid food, you can gradually decrease the water content. So you can look all of this up, but I think common sense would tell you that, things to remember that would be good to have off the top of your head is that by 3 weeks of age, we can start thinking about introducing food to puppies and kittens, right? And you can look up how to do it. It is often nice to use the same food that they're going to eat on its own after weaning, so you don't want to switch foods all the time because that's going to give a lot of GI upset, and diarrhea, as you probably can guess, can be catastrophic to these little guys. So for cats, during their whole growth phase, their RER is about their daily energy requirements is about 2.5 times their RER. They grow about 100 grams a week until they're about 5 months old. So this is an interesting, I've found this very, very helpful. 400 grams would be gained in a month, right? So when they're gonna grow 100 grams a week. And so a 1 month old kitten weighs about a pound, right? If they're maybe 50 grams when they're born. And a 2 month old kitten weighs about 2 pounds. And a 2.5 month old kitten weighs about 2.5 pounds. So they're about a pound a month until they're 5 months old. So if you are aging kittens, this is very reliable. So I know that doesn't have anything to do with nutrition, although, body weight kind of does. And then the males grow a little faster and the females grow a little slower. And if you neuter them early, like if you're neutering them at 4 or 5 months, their energy requirements do go down. So here's some recommended feeding schedules, feeding 3 or 4 times a day so they don't really engorge their bellies, which can cause some trouble and indigestion. And after they're 6 months of old, feeding them twice a day is fine. Again, showing an example that the AFCO says this kind of food is appropriate for growth, cat food for growth. All right, so for kittens, again, very much a repeat of pregnancy and lactation. They need fats. It's concentrated energy for growth. You have to balance that with the risk of obesity, especially if you're neutering pretty early and their energy requirements are going down. And just an illustration that for growth, look at that, at least double the amount of fat versus maintenance dry matter. For protein, again, pretty high as they're weaning and getting onto solid food, and then tapering down to adult requirements. So again, we can see quite an increase versus maintenance when you're growing. When you are a growing animal, you need more protein. And again, I wouldn't expect anybody to have those memorized, but just know that they need more. Kittens require essential fatty acids. You've already seen this. Linoleic and arachidonic acids are important for cats. DHA is also important for cats. It's important for brain development, for their retinas, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know the numbers. Calcium, we want to optimize this. They're more resistant to issues than dogs, but they are certainly not immune. Excessive calcium isn't normally related to orthopedic problems, but low calcium and high phosphorus can be. Maybe I'll send you out a note about that because it's pretty interesting, but I'm not going to cover it here. So while you're weaning, you're trying to make the mom not lose too much weight, but if they're in poor body condition, you need to, if they lose too much weight, even once the puppies are weaned, you'd want to keep feeding them growth and lactation diet until they get their weight back up. You want to avoid mastitis by having a clean environment and avoiding trauma to the mammary glands. This means potentially trimming little puppy nails or kitten nails so they don't get scratches. So after weaning, if they're an okay weight, you want to feed them their maintenance requirement. Sorry, did I not advance that slide? Okay. So drying off a lactating mom could be something to do. Hopefully this all happens naturally, but you may be approached by somebody, particularly with dogs, where they want to dry off the mom and it's an appropriate time. So this involves isolating the mom from the puppies and actually withholding food from the mom for 24 hours. And then after that, providing a day where they just get a quarter of what they need and then half of what they need, and then their normal maintenance. So it would involve at first actually doing NPO for the mom. So if she doesn't get food, hopefully her milk supply goes way down. Separating for certain times the pups and the mom. Allowing them to see each other is important for behavior up until they're 8 weeks or even longer, but we would want to start feeding them separately and trying to get the mom to make less milk. Okay, so pups need a lot of energy. We want to have good nutritional density of food, and we want to have puppies grow at an optimal rate, not their maximum rate. So we want to have slow growth, and this is important for large breed dogs, which I'm sure you probably all know. So we're mostly using body condition scoring to judge this. Okay, So here we have, at what age do they reach their mature weight, or they're supposed to? It can take a lot longer for large and giant breeds. And large breed dogs used to be defined as over 70 pounds, but nowadays we're often saying anything over 50 pounds at an expected adult weight is deemed a large breed dog. So you're going to continue to feed a diet designed for growth until they reach maturity, and that's different depending on their breed. You're monitoring their body condition score closely, and for small to medium breeds, we're just going for an ideal body condition score. But it's important to note that for large and giant breed dogs, we are trying to keep them quite slim. So energy needs for growing puppies, again, you can just look at these numbers. No one is expecting you to have these memorized. But they need more energy as they grow, but we're tapering it down as they get bigger. And this is a Waltham's growth chart where you can actually plot. So the important thing is that wherever they start, they try to stay on that. So if they start off being fairly small at birth or fairly large, you would want to follow that. And they have these for all different breeds. So it's a female versus a male, and what weight do we expect at adult? And so you can look up these charts and find those for people with puppies. Great. So we require more protein than maintenance. You can see that here. And this chart talks about all the different things that can go wrong if we feed too little or too much. And you can look at that later. They need essential fatty acids and fat, just like kittens. Here's the study where if they had an enhanced amount of DHA, that they were more trainable. For calcium, I just want to spend a couple of minutes. I know I'm over time talking about calcium and phosphorus. So with puppies, unlike kittens, if you feed them a lot of calcium, they will absorb it. So it's real. They don't have the homeostasis to be able to regulate that on their own. So that is an important thing. So if they get too much calcium, they are at risk for those orthopedic development issues that you see listed there. By the time they're about 10 months old, they're able to do it better. Okay, this I think is like the last-ish slide. So just important to have a look at this slide. You don't have to have the numbers memorized, but I'm showing you that for a regular-sized puppy, we have certain levels of calcium, okay, with a ratio. For large and giant breed, okay, look at these amounts. I mean, I know we have overlap, but it's a little bit less because it's important for large and giant breed dogs not to give them too much calcium and phosphorus. It's important to have their skeleton grow not too fast so that their muscles and tendons can catch up and avoid orthopedic problems. And if you look at this ratio, again, there's overlap, but it's lower, okay? However, the large and giant breed dogs are still higher than maintenance. Okay, so we do still want to keep them on a growth. We don't want to say, oh, it's a large breed dog, so just switch it to a maintenance diet when they're 4 months old, or keep them on a maintenance diet. There are differences, but if you can see these guys are higher than maintenance, and these guys are kind of in the middle. And that's important to keep in mind. Again, the numbers you can look at later. So this is the last slide. It's the take-home growth of puppies and kittens. Know how to give advice about weaning. Know that puppies and kittens have increased need for energy, proteins, fats, essential fatty acids, and calcium and phosphorus. But calcium and phosphorus especially have to be optimally controlled. Feed a diet designed for growth and specific to large and giant breeds if they're required. You want to optimize their growth, not maximize it, minimizing obesity, keeping those large breed dogs slim, and preventing orthopedic disease. Know how to find your energy requirements by using a chart, and look at those Waltham growth charts to help you out. The required calcium and phosphorus in large and giant breeds is slightly more than adult maintenance, but relatively less for small and medium breed puppies, and the ratio is important. Keep the giant breeds lean, I already said that. And that's it. We won't go through this question because I'm over time. Sorry about that. So the final thing is, for those large and breed dogs, I don't want you to get confused. Obviously, a Great Dane puppy is going to need more calcium than a Chihuahua, okay? Like the actual milligrams it's eating. But if you looked at the relative dry matter basis, the Great Dane is lower compared to a small breed dog. Does that make sense? Okay, so the relative amounts of energy and calcium for large breed dogs is lower. Of course, overall, they're eating more than the Chihuahua, but relative on a dry matter basis, lower energy for large breed dogs, lower calcium and phosphorus for large breed dogs to optimize their growth. That's all. I have to go to junior surgery, but I'm available by email if people have questions.